Well, it's a privilege to be here today. Actually, it's been a real education this morning to listen to you discuss your situation here in Greece with regard to clinical trials and where you're thinking about going with them as well. I think in our panel today, we're going to discuss a bit what's going on in Brussels, the EU legislation, and maybe we try to make a match there. I took some notes because I'm still learning. And what I was thinking about this morning mostly was, I think really for clinical trials to be really successful, they need to be integrated as fully as possible into healthcare. So I think Professor van den Anker gave a really good suggestion there with regard to when he said, you know, within your hospital, within your organization, patient care and clinical trials, they need to be seen together. And I think this is really the challenge. It's not just the challenge inside the hospital. It's also the challenge nationally or even at the EU level. We have to make people understand that health research and healthcare go hand in hand and they work together. But it's not easy, and I think that's part of what I want to say. We saw from the Deputy Minister Salma's discussions this morning that the public perception of clinical trials is one of the biggest challenges and remains one of the biggest challenges, I'm sure not only in Greece, but everywhere in Europe. So really how to overcome that and how to have people to understand really that expenditure on pharmaceuticals is something that is in a certain sense a shortcut to good health economics or a good place to begin with health economics. So it was interesting to see the kinds of, let's say, reforms or ideas that the Deputy Minister had with regard to improving the system, especially with regard to the hospitals and their role inside of the healthcare too. Then we also had a number of good speakers from the pharmaceutical industry and from the Chamber of Commerce and so forth, who stressed the scientific necessity for clinical trials, and that's what I tried to talk about a bit in my slides, but also that there is an economic need for clinical research, not only in Greece, but in every country in a certain sense. I really don't understand how you could run a healthcare program, a public healthcare program especially, or a private healthcare program, without investment coming from research. So somehow we need to understand that health expenditure is also related to innovation and investment inside of research. And I think that's part of the challenge. So in our discussion here, we want to look at the research regulations that are being proposed at the European level, and in particular, how they impact on the legal, ethical, and social aspects of clinical trials here. And again, this will come very much to this whole public perception, national, international perception of clinical trials. I don't know how many of you have had a chance to read the proposed legislation that came out in July this year. Has anybody here had an opportunity to look at it? It's a proposed regulation from the European Union here on regulating clinical trials, which would update the directive from 2001 here, right? And what I understand that is risk is the key concept that's being proposed now as the framework for regulating clinical trials. In fact, it's proportional risk, which I'll come to in a few minutes. But the focus for the regulation of both the ethical and the social aspects, and indeed, even for the methodological or scientific aspects of a clinical trial, is risk. And this is what we will see here. So risk proportionality in European clinical trials is what's going to become important here. The clinical trial methodology, which is, I think, not as well addressed in the proposed regulation as it could be or should be, but will need to be addressed at the national level, both at the level of the local institution and the ethics committee and at the level of the regulators. Selection of research populations, including vulnerable groups, children, which we heard about this morning, also the elderly, social, psychological groups with different social and psychological profiles, the inclusion of healthy volunteers, and the selection of control arms, which is explicitly addressed there, including placebo or no treatment there. Now, for me, this slide here, or this quotation here from the proposed regulation, really is the key to what I think they're suggesting here. The regulation of clinical trials addresses two distinct risks. The first is the risk to subject safety, and the second is the risk to data reliability, which is usually discussed inside of this regulation as data reliability and robustness. But they don't include it just in the sentence, but we have to keep that in the back of our mind. Now, what I find interesting here are these are the two key areas, two distinct risks that the regulation addresses. However, the second risk, which I think is the most interesting in a certain sense, but also the most difficult, is never further addressed than in those few words there, the risk to data reliability. The rest of the proposed regulation does not address it. What it does go on is to talk about the former one, the risk to public safety. So you know, whenever government authorities, be it at the EU level or at the national level, are proposing legislation, they're always doing this in terms of public and the public image, and in this case here, with regard to subject safety. So the former, and this is what they discussed most broadly inside of the regulation, is the risk to subject safety, and this has to do with a range of factors, including the extent of knowledge and prior experience with the investigational medicinal product, and the type of intervention. Now, I just want to come back to a bit of the history or the background around this kind of idea of intervention and how we perceive that here. The Declaration of Helsinki, pretty much, which is pretty much largely really a European document and driven by European thinking, and still is today, even more so today perhaps than 10 years ago, the Declaration of Helsinki really has this idea of what I think is perhaps most difficult to understand in clinical trials, and that is the relationship between therapy and experimentation, or therapy and doing a clinical trial. So to what extent, when you're doing a clinical trial, are you bringing a therapeutic benefit for the participant in the clinical trial? And to what extent, when you're doing a clinical trial, are you looking really at data for a more general public health benefit? And I think these two things are really in the challenges here. And as you can see, just in the very basic structure of the Declaration of Helsinki, beginning in 1964, but still carried out today in its general structure, is a kind of distinction, if you want, between research combined with professional care and non-therapeutic research. And this is also, I would say, to a certain extent, this kind of tension is behind the discussion in the proposed regulation. Helsinki, and this is from the most recent revision of the Declaration of Helsinki, insists, and has always insisted since the early 1950s, even before it was written, if you want, the World Medical Association has always insisted on the precedence of the individual over, and then in a very broad statement in 2008, all of the other interest. Now, this really raises more and more to the forefront and the center of the discussion this idea of a therapeutic benefit for the participant in the clinical trial over and above almost the health science benefit that would eventually contribute to a general population. So here in 1964, when Helsinki's first agreed to by the World Medical Association, they said the doctor can combine clinical research with professional care, and the objective being the acquisition of new medical knowledge only when the interest really, that therapeutic interest for the particular patient is put up first and foremost here. And then between 1975 and 1983, we all know this very difficult paragraph that actually after 1996 became really of importance. But here it says the potential benefits, hazards, and discomforts of a new method, which is really a new therapy, a new treatment, should be weighed against the advantages of the best current diagnostic and therapeutic treatment or intervention. And in any medical study, every patient, including those of a control group, and this is where we start to get into fuzzy water, if any, should be assured of the best proven treatment or therapeutic benefit that's available. Here. Then in 1996, in South Africa, the World Medical Association revised that paragraph, actually with the intention to say that what had been said earlier meant, well, there are cases, because there was a discussion with the earlier part of Helsinki to say, well, people were saying, well, you can never use placebo then. So they added this sentence below, this does not exclude the use of placebo in studies where no proven diagnostic or therapeutic method exists, with the intention really of saying there are certain cases where you can use placebo. But then in 1997, when this was reinterpreted primarily by the editor of the New England Journal of Medicine, it came up to mean more or less, well, you could almost never use placebo or only in very limited situations. And this is where the discussion has been since then. And just to follow it a little bit more, in 2000, when the Declaration of Helsinki underwent a major revision, a focus on this paragraph said that the benefits risk burdens of a new method, which will become a new treatment or a new therapy, should be tested against the best proven. And this does not exclude the use of placebo or no treatment in studies where no proven therapeutic or beneficial intervention already exists. Then there was a lot of discussion about that. In 2002, the World Medical Association decided it needed to clarify that, reaffirmed its position, and then changed its position in the next paragraph, saying, when there's for compelling and scientifically sound methodological reasons, you can do it. And this is really the key issue here. And this is the issue that will eventually needs to be addressed through the regulation in Europe. What are scientific or compelling and scientifically sound methodological issues for the use of placebo, or we could say for the use of one control group versus another, and where it's only for a minor condition and there's no substantial additional risk to the participants here. So this is the current paragraph, which is really integrating what was done in 2000 and 2002 and 2008 here, saying really a new intervention, which doesn't necessarily have to be a new one. They've corrected method to intervention, must be tested against those of the best proven intervention, and placebos or no treatments are acceptable in studies where no current proven intervention exists, and again, for compelling or scientifically sound reasons, or where there's minimal risk to the participants here. Again, more reaction to that. Indeed, there was reaction to that already from the European Medicines Agency in 2004. This is a reaction in 2008, prior even to the revision of the Declaration of Helsinki, which was in October of 2008, by the US FDA, saying we're going to distance ourselves from the use of the Declaration of Helsinki. And then in February of 2010, the World Medical Association held a meeting in São Paulo in Brazil, where they said at the end of it, it was a long two-day meeting there, and they said, well, there's no urgent need for change to the ethical position of the Declaration of Helsinki, and the current version of the Declaration is close to an acceptable middle ground. And then the Secretary General said to me, well, we're now on a countdown really to a revision. And currently, as we're here discussing what's going on with Europe and with Greece, the World Medical Association is in South Africa discussing what's going to happen with the Declaration of Helsinki. And in particular, this will be another one of the main points that they discussed. So just to try to come back now to where we are with Europe here. For the future assessment of clinical trials in Europe, a key issue that we need to focus on and we need to really understand, I think, is the methodology of the clinical trial and to what extent that methodology needs to address, should address, let's say, or bring, let's say, a therapeutic benefit or necessarily bring a therapeutic benefit to the participants in the clinical trial. And just to put it back into this European framework that we're already in, but it's going to be maybe pushed in a different way by the proposal. It says the assessment of the application for clinical trials should address in particular the anticipated therapeutic and public health benefits. And this is quite different than the Declaration of Helsinki, you can see it. The inclusion of public health benefits. So it's not only the therapeutic benefit to the individual that becomes important, but it's also what will the clinical trial contribute to public health? And again, I come back to what I said originally. Clinical trials only really become successful or only really move when clinical trials are seen as part of public health care. So health research and health care put together. And it should then be left to the member states concerned to determine the appropriate body or bodies to be involved in this assessment. And this really refers both to the relationship between the regulatory authority and the ethics committees there, as well as the hospitals as well. So just to conclude, the challenge to European clinical trials regulation is to clarify proportional risk with regard to methodology, with regard to what is needed for, let's say, the benefit, the therapeutic benefit of the participants in the clinical trial, and what's needed for public health generally with regard to clinical trials, and how can we go about achieving a structure that will address this for both the social and ethical aspects. Thank you very much.